the former Episcopal bishop of the Rio Grande, who was ordained a Catholic priest of the Archdiocese of Santa Fe, New Mexico, in February of 2009. The personal ordinariate of the Chair of St. Peter, which is similar to a diocese in function but national in scope, will be based at a parish in Houston. More than 100 former Anglican priests have applied to become Catholic priests in the ordinariate, and 1,400 individuals from 22 communities have expressed interest in joining. The parishes and communities accepted into the ordinariate will be fully Catholic, but retain elements of their Anglican heritage and traditions, particularly in the liturgy. In news now from around the world, 2011 will be remembered for the many natural disasters that took place around the globe. Catholic News Service takes a look back over this past year at the tragedies that struck and the importance of the work of Catholic agencies that have provided help in devastated areas.
Earthquakes, floods, droughts, and hurricanes. 2011 saw its share of natural disasters that left people in dire straits, church officials scrambling to help, and Catholics worldwide offering prayers and financial support. The effects will be felt for years to come. In March, northeastern Japan was hit with a triple whammy: a magnitude 9 earthquake followed by a tsunami and a nuclear meltdown. More than 16,000 people died in the disasters. Japanese church leaders mobilized to offer help and, in some cases, rebuilding began. But by December, the International Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies still had page after page of names of the missing. In the United States, more than 550 people were killed in tornadoes in 2011, a figure insurance companies said was more than the previous 10 years combined. Joplin, Missouri, Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and Springfield, Massachusetts were among the hardest hit. Catholic Charities mobilized nationwide, using its network of local agencies to help victims. The southwestern United States suffered a serious drought, while the Northeast saw blizzards, hurricanes, tropical storms, and even an earthquake. In November, the United Nations warned that hundreds of thousands of Central Americans affected by severe flooding would need help for at least 6 months. Thais and others in Southeast Asia also suffered from flooding. All year, UN officials warned about the drought in the Horn of Africa, which left at least 10 million people in need of aid. One Vatican official warned that those who escaped the food emergency risked becoming a lost generation because of the severe lack of resources, including schools.
Looking at other news now from the Vatican, according to the Vatican, over 2.5 million people took part in papal ceremonies in 2011. The numbers were released by the prefecture of the papal household, which said that in 2011, 1.2 million people celebrated the Angelus along with the Pope. About 400,000 people visited St. Peter's Square for the Pope's weekly general audience. And for liturgical celebrations, the numbers added up to almost 850,000 people. Close to 102,000 people took part in special audiences with the Pope. The numbers actually show an increase over the past 3 years. The numbers do not take into account apostolic visits in Italy or abroad. And finally, in the news, according to British documents that have just been declassified, Pope John Paul II tried unsuccessfully to intervene to end a 1981 hunger strike by Catholic prisoners in a British jail in Northern Ireland. The documents claim the Pope sent a special envoy to persuade the prisoners to call off the hunger strike. The leader of the Provisional Irish Republican Army prisoners, Bobby Sands, said he would suspend the hunger strike in return for discussions with a British government official, 2 priests, and 3 other prisoners as witnesses. However, the British rejected the offer, claiming it was an attempt to open negotiations. The prisoners, who were in jail for paramilitary activity against British rule in Northern Ireland, had begun their hunger strike in a bid to be reclassified as political prisoners, a move Britain vehemently rejected. Sands died May 5, 1981, after 66 days on hunger strike. 10 prisoners starved themselves to death before a compromise was reached that October. The hunger strike significantly polarized tensions between the majority Protestant and minority Catholic communities in Northern Ireland. More than 100,000 Catholics attended Sands' funeral, and Sinn Féin, the political wing of the Irish Republican Army, began contesting elections for the first time. Well, that is all the information we have for you at this time. Please stay with Catholic TV for more Catholic news. Until then, I'm Kevin Nelson, and I'll see you next time on Catholic Newsbreak. Hi, everyone. I'm Kevin Nelson for Catholic Newsbreak. Here's what's happening this week in the news. We begin with news from around the country. A Vatican congregation confirmed a second miracle attributed to the intercession of Blessed Mary and Cope of Molokai, thus clearing the path to her sainthood. The final step for her canonization is the approval by Pope Benedict XVI. The Vatican decision was announced by the sisters' religious community, the Sisters of St. Francis of the Newman Communities in Syracuse, New York, and by Honolulu Bishop Larry Silva. Mother Marian, who worked as a teacher and hospital administrator in New York, spent the last 30 years of her life ministering on the Hawaiian island of Molokai to those with leprosy. She died on the island in 1918 at the age of 80. The first miracle required for her beatification was the medically unexplainable recovery of a New York girl who recovered from near death after prayers were said to Mother Marianne. The only known detail about the second miracle is the recovery of a woman expected to die. Doctors were amazed at her survival and declared her recovery inexplicable. The Sisters of St. Francis will not discuss details of the second miracle until after the Pope's proclamation of Mother Marianne's sainthood. In news now from the Vatican, Pope Benedict XVI has named a replacement for the Archbishop of Guadalajara, Mexico. Rome Report says more on this new appointment.
The city of Guadalajara in Mexico has a new archbishop. It's 62-year-old Cardinal Jose Francisco Robles Ortega, who up until recently served as the Archbishop of Monterrey. He will replace 78-year-old Juan Sandoval Iñiguez, who resigned because of age limit restrictions. Cardinal Ortega was born in Mascota, Jalisco. He became a priest in 1976 and a bishop in 1991. He's known as an expert in interreligious dialogue, and he's also a member of the Pontifical Council for the New Evangelization.
With the appointment, Cardinal Robles assumes the leadership of one of Latin America's most influential archdioceses. The Guadalajara Seminary produces 1,500 priests annually, while according to census data, the region remains somewhat traditional, with more than 90% of residents self-identifying as Catholic. In other news from around the country, 2 U.S. Catholic evangelists have been appointed by Pope Benedict XVI to advise the newly created Pontifical Council for Promoting New Evangelization. They are Curtis Martin, founder and president of the Fellowship of Catholic University Students and a fellow at the Augustine Institute in Denver, and Ralph Martin, director of graduate theology programs in evangelization at Sacred Heart Major Seminary in the Archdiocese of Detroit, and the founding director of the International Catholic Charismatic Renewal Office in Rome. Of the 15 experts chosen, 9 are clergy and 6 are lay Catholics. Maria Voci, who is president of the Focolare movement, was the one woman selected as an advisor. The majority of those chosen are professors from Europe, and 4 have taught at Rome's Pontifical Lateran University. In their new positions as consultors, they will advise Vatican congregations or councils on matters under study and visit the Vatican once or twice a year for meetings. In news now from around the world, Archbishop Dominic Mimberti, the Vatican's top foreign affairs official, addressed members at the 18th meeting of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, or OSCE, which was held in Lithuania recently. The Archbishop said there may be more than 200 million Christians of different confessions who are in difficulty because of legal and cultural structures that lead to their discrimination. He said the celebration of an International Day Against Persecution and Discrimination of Christians might prove to be an important sign that governments are willing to deal with this serious issue. In September, the Lithuanian OSCE chairmanship had organized a conference held in Rome entitled Preventing and Responding to Hate Incidents and Crimes Against Christians. The Archbishop called that event successful and hopeful because it recognized the need for dialogue between Christians, other religious groups, and non-believers. He said another similar gathering is needed in the future. And finally in the news, the 80th annual procession in honor of the Virgin of Guadalupe was held recently in East Los Angeles. As it has been the tradition for the past 8 decades, parish groups decorated floats, equestrians, and indigenous dancers escorted the image of the Virgin of Guadalupe in a 2-mile walk that ended at East Los Angeles College Stadium, where they gathered for the Mass, at which Los Angeles Archbishop Jose Gomez presided. The procession is the oldest religious procession in Los Angeles that recalls Mary appearing to St. Juan Diego 480 years ago at Tepeyac Hill in what is now the northern part of Mexico City. In his homily, Archbishop Gomez recounted the days when his whole family made a pilgrimage to the Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico City every summer. The Archbishop urged the crowd of 25,000 to immerse themselves in a deeper conversion and to view and help each other as brothers and sisters of the family of God. That is all the information we have for you at this time. Please stay with Catholic TV for more Catholic news. Until then, I'm Kevin Nelson, and I'll see you next time on Catholic Newsbreak. Hi everyone, I'm Kevin Nelson for Catholic Newsbreak. Here's what's happening this week in the news. We begin with news from the Vatican. During a recent plenary meeting with members of the International Theological Commission, Pope Benedict XVI said theology is necessary in promoting peace and harmony. His Holiness said that Catholic theology's attention to the links between faith and reason is more necessary than ever today because it demonstrates the compatibility of different sources of knowledge. Members of the Commission are theologians appointed by the Pope to study themes of current interests and offer expert advice to the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. During this meeting, they continued their work on 3 studies: the Catholic understanding of belief in one God, the relation of Catholic social teaching to Catholic doctrine, and the status of Catholic theology today. Pope Benedict said Christianity's belief in one God in the 3 persons of the Trinity, or monotheism, teaches that God is a community of love to which people are invited in a way that makes it possible for brotherhood and harmony among the people God has created. He said Christian theology, together with the life of believers, must restore the appropriate and clear evidence of the Trinitarian revelation on our community. In other news from the Vatican Christmas tree is up in St. Peter's Square. Pope Benedict XVI met with the bishops from New Jersey on their ad limina visit. Archbishop Silvano Tomasi, the Vatican's representative to UN, is speaking out against the violence in Syria, and Honduran Cardinal Oscar Rodriguez Maradiaga, president of Caritas Internationalis, is in Durban, South Africa for the climate change discussion. John Thavis of Catholic News Service has all the latest news from the Vatican.
A rainy Monday here at the Vatican, but that didn't stop Vatican workmen from putting in place the Vatican's Christmas tree. This is a spruce tree from Ukraine, 100 feet tall. It weighs more than 5 tons, so they say anyway, and it had to be helicoptered out of the forest. As soon as it stops raining, they'll start decorating the tree with gold and silver balls and energy-efficient LED lights. Today, Pope Benedict met with a group of U.S. bishops from New Jersey, led by Archbishop John Myers of Newark. Other bishops from Pennsylvania are also in town. This is the 3rd group of U.S. bishops who have come to Rome for their ad limina visits. This group is having private meetings with the Pope, but no papal speech. Over the weekend, a Vatican representative in Geneva, Archbishop Silvano Tomasi, made the sharpest Vatican comments to date on the Syrian government's crackdown on protesters, which the UN says has left more than 4,000 people dead since last March. Archbishop Tomasi said the violence must stop, and he called on the Syrian government to make real reforms. Finally, a Caritas Internationalis delegation is in Durban, South Africa for the Climate Change Summit, trying to influence the outcome. The Caritas president, Cardinal Oscar Rodriguez Maradiaga, joined an interfaith rally over the weekend, and he said climate change is no longer a marginal issue, but one that affects the very future of entire populations.
And in news now from around the country, a Department of Health and Human Services official told a congressional committee that a U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops program aiding victims of human trafficking has been denied funding after its administrators declined to propose alternatives to a government requirement that female victims receive the full range of legally permissible gynecological and obstetric care. Under questioning from members of the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, George Sheldon, acting Assistant Secretary of the Administration for Children and Families, said he made the final decision to award grants worth almost $5 million to 3 other agencies that agreed to provide access to such services as abortion, contraception, and sterilization, which are services required under the National Trafficking Victim Assistance Program. The committee hearing was called as House members investigated why the Bishop's Migration and Refugee Services Department was denied funding for its program, despite its positive track record of assisting nearly 2,800 trafficking victims and their families. Committee members expressed concern that federal laws governing conscience rights in declining to offer abortion services were ignored by Health and Human Services officials in awarding the grants. Well, that is all the information we have for you this time. Please stay with Catholic TV for more Catholic news. Until then, I'm Kevin Nelson, and I'll see you next time on Catholic Newsbreak. Hi everyone, I'm Kevin Nelson for Catholic Newsbreak. Here's what's happening this week in the news. We begin from the Vatican. The ad limina visits to the Vatican for bishops from the United States are underway. Cardinal Sean O'Malley led the first group of bishops from the northeastern part of the United States. While at the Vatican, the bishops will be reporting on their diocese. Catholic News Service spoke with Bishop Timothy McDonald from the Diocese of Springfield, Massachusetts, about what the visit means to him.
Bishop Timothy McDonald of Springfield, Massachusetts is in Rome this week with a group of bishops from New England for their ad limina visits. He describes the meetings as a pilgrimage.
I call it a pilgrimage because that's really what it is. It is a pilgrimage to the tombs of St. Peter and St. Paul, and it's an opportunity on that pilgrimage, here in the city where both of them were martyred, to meet with the successor of Peter and to realize what the sacrifices of the Church through the years have been and all the great things accomplished because of the blood of martyrs is the seed of faith.
But this round of visits with the Pope is a bit different than in times past. There's a new format that features group discussions rather than one-on-one meetings with the Pope.
He asks each bishop to speak, and then he asks questions back and forth, and it's a dialogue. So in many ways, it's a great experience because we learn from each other and we learn most of all from him.
Bishop McDonald said traveling to the heart of the Universal Church made him realize how blessed his own diocese is.
We have been hit this past year with nature's fury more than once. We have had this past year, I'd say, everything but the plague of locusts and the eruption of a volcano. Nevertheless, when I hear what other dioceses are going through, I realize how blessed we really are, because while we have temporary discomforts, we don't have the permanent ones that so many parts of the world have.
In other news from the Vatican, a communique from the General Secretary of the Synod of Bishops said that immigration is a big challenge for the new evangelization in North and South America. The note said that the Church is involved in the promotion of social programs and religious assistance for immigrants with the aim of helping their cultural integration and social peace. The statement was a report on a recent meeting of members of the Council responsible for monitoring how Catholics in the region are implementing ideas from the 1997 Synod of Bishops and Pope John Paul II's 1997 Apostolic Exhortation about the Synod's discussions. This recent meeting also discussed the topics and agenda planned for the next Global Synod of Bishops, which will begin in 2012 and will focus on the new evangelization. The communique surveyed the situation of the Church in the Americas. It found that there are serious difficulties faced by immigrants, but the statement said immigrants bring a greater integration of the peoples of North and South, as well as a greater understanding of the need for international cooperation and solidarity to solve global problems. In news now from around the country, the Catholic Campaign for Human Development, or CCHD, is refuting a 212-page report that says 55 agencies funded by the U.S. Bishop's anti-poverty program in the 2010-2011 were in conflict with church teaching. Leaders of the CCHD, including its executive director, Ralph McLeod, said the charges from an American Life League study against all but one of the agencies were unfounded. In that one case, McLeod said that funding was withdrawn from an immigrant rights group in Minnesota because it was found to be distributing condoms. The 54 remaining agencies were found in compliance after follow-up investigation by the CCHD staff. The report that was posted on the American Life League's website in October accused CCHD of promoting abortion, homosexuality, and Marxist ideology contrary to church doctrine. Director of the League's Defend the Faith Project and the report's author, Michael Hitchborn, said his research showed that the organizations violated church doctrine either through specific activities or through coalitions. The American Life League has questioned the thoroughness of CCHD's process for vetting grant applications from poverty-fighting agencies since 2008. This new report was released just weeks before the annual CCHD collection in parishes. McLeod said the charges were based on information obtained from outdated websites and that the cited agencies were not contacted for verification or were incorrect assessments of the poverty-fighting program's guidelines regarding memberships in coalitions. And in news from around the world, a recent retired bishop is considering a run for president in his native Honduras. Rome Reports has more on this story.
A Central American bishop is hoping to be the next president of Honduras. Luis Santos Villeda turned 75 in November. The Pope recently accepted his resignation since under canon law he can only serve until that very age. Even though Villeda is now a retired bishop, he remains a priest, which would prohibit him from running for office. Nonetheless, he's hoping the Pope will give him permission to start a political career.
And finally in the news, Catholic colleges and universities are being urged to strengthen their commitment to mission-based sustainability efforts. Now a new resource called Sustainability and Catholic Higher Education, a toolkit for mission integration, is there to help. Retired Bishop William Skillstad of Spokane, Washington, honorary chairman of the Catholic Coalition on Climate Change, said he hopes our Catholic colleges and universities will find it a practical and effective tool for capturing and directing the energy of so many of the young people, the Church's future, on the environment. The resource revolves around the 5 components of the Coalition's St. Francis Pledge to care for creation and the poor: pray, learn, assess, act, and advocate. It contains a toolkit which offers practical suggestions about how to identify campus leaders and implement suggestions for living each component on campus and in the larger community. 8 national Catholic organizations are co-sponsoring and promoting the resource. If you'd like more information on this initiative, you can go to www.catholicclimatecovenant.org. Well, that is all the information we have for you at this time. Please stay with Catholic TV for more Catholic news. Until then, I'm Kevin Nelson, and I'll see you next time on Catholic News Break. Hi everyone, I'm Kevin Nelson for Catholic News Break. Here's what's happening this week in the news. We begin from the Vatican. The Pope has returned from his summer vacation and is getting back to his busy schedule at the Vatican, including meeting with prelates from Indonesia this week. He also gave Sunday's Angelus in St. Peter's Square, where he told pilgrims gathered that guardian angels exist to protect every human life from its beginning to end. Sunday marked the Feast of Guardian Angels. During the Angelus, the Pope asked for prayers for all the protection of all those who do the Lord's work, especially for those who face religious intolerance. Catholic News Service has more on the Angelus.
Pope Benedict is finally back from his summer vacation at the Papal Villa in Castel Gandolfo. For the past 2 years, the Pope no longer vacations in the Northern Alps, and instead he is stuck closer to home in Rome. The Pope has said the Papal Villa in the small hill town of Castel Gandolfo is a place where he can enjoy the silence and the beauty of nature and get caught up on his writing projects. The word going around is the Pope is just about finished with his third and final volume of his Jesus of Nazareth series. Now, the Pope was away from the Vatican for nearly 3 months, with sporadic brief trips back to Rome for several Wednesday general audiences. Now that he's back, he's returning to his usual routine with meeting heads of the Roman Curia and bishops visiting the Vatican. This week, for example, are prelates from Indonesia. He's also back to giving the Angelus address from his studio window overlooking St. Peter's Square. And yesterday, on the Feast of the Guardian Angels, the Pope talked about guardian angels. He said guardian angels exist to protect every single human life from its very beginning. God uses these unique ministers, he said, to protect people on their earthly journey and to be a sign of God's care and concern for all people.
Looking out at other news from the Vatican, the new prefect of the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples, Archbishop Fernando Foloni, says Catholics are improving the lives of the poor and promoting dialogue when they financially and spiritually support missionary work. The Archbishop, who was appointed in May to head the Vatican congregation responsible for the church in mission territories, said evangelization always promotes the development of peoples. His remarks came from an interview on the importance of the Church's observation of October as a month dedicated to the missions. Archbishop Foloni said all of the baptized have a responsibility for mission. He said in defending the principles of the gospel, one must speak of justice, which many of the countries in the mission lands need. The Archbishop also said that evangelization promotes ecology, helping make known and increasing respect for the environment, both on the part of the local population as well as on our own. World Mission Sunday is October 23rd. One other note from the Vatican, World Communications Day may celebrate interaction and exchange through all different types of media, but all the Pope wants for the 2012 celebrations is silence. Rome Reports explains the Pope's focus for next May's World Communications Day.
The Vatican is getting ready for the next World Communication Day. The theme is Silence and Word, and the message is specifically aimed at journalists. The topic is meant to remind journalists to take a step back from modern technology and the constant flow of information. Silence, says the Vatican, opens a window for reflection. It even invites people to engage in conversations that in turn can help promote the new evangelization. The celebration goes back to 1963, when it was launched by the Second Vatican Council. Decades later, it's still celebrated in most countries. World Communication Day is officially celebrated on the Sunday before Pentecost, which next year will be May 20th, 2012. Traditionally, the Pope's reflection is usually made public on January 24th, the feast day of the patron of writers.
In news from around the country, Bishop Mark Barczyk of Altoona, Johnstown, Pennsylvania, recently blessed the cornerstone and the steeple cross of the Suzanne Poland Paterno Catholic Student Faith Center at Penn State University. In his comments, the bishop said that it was marvelous to be in this space, which will soon truly become a sacred space. Within a year, the framed-out room will house the center's chapel. The center was named for the wife of Penn State football coach Joe Paterno. It is meant to recognize the Paterno family's financial support of the project, but more importantly, Mrs. Paterno's commitment to the Catholic faith and her active participation in the life of the Penn State Catholic community. Benedictine Father Matthew Laffey, the campus ministry director, made the welcoming remarks during the ceremony, saying, "Today we take another step to fulfilling our dream of a home for Catholic students on campus." And finally in the news, the U.S. bishops have established a committee to shape public policy and coordinate the Church's response to government policies that promote contraception, abortion and same-sex marriage, and policies that amount to an assault on religious freedom. The Ad Hoc Committee for Religious Liberty was announced by New York's Archbishop Timothy Dolan, president of the USCCB. Bishop William Laurie of Bridgeport, Connecticut, chairman of the new committee, explained the motivation for its formation, saying there is a common and factually grounded perception that religious liberty is increasingly under assault at the state and federal level in the United States, whether through unfriendly legislation or through rules and regulations that impede or tend to impede the work of the Church. Over the last year, Bishop Laurie has publicly defended religious liberty. In October of 2010, he issued Let Freedom Ring, a pastoral letter on religious freedom, which laid out an argument that some legislative efforts in the government seem to be aimed solely at the Catholic Church. Well, that is all the information we have for you at this time. Please stay with Catholic TV for more Catholic news. Until then, I'm Kevin Nelson, and I'll see you next time on Catholic Newsbreak. Hi everyone, I'm Kevin Nelson for Catholic Newsbreak. Here's what's happening this week in the news. We begin with news from the Vatican. One of Pope Benedict's first official engagements during his trip to Germany included speaking to the German Parliament. Though about 100 members boycotted the event, the Pope received an enthusiastic applause from the Parliament when he spoke on issues such as respect for human nature and equality of all men. Rome Reports now has more on the Pope's words.
During his speech before Germany's parliament, the Pope challenged all politicians to recognize right from wrong. Upon arrival, he was greeted with a long applause by his fellow German countrymen. Even though roughly 100 members of parliament boycotted his speech, their absence went mostly unnoticed, since some of their seats were occupied by former members of parliament. In his speech, the Pope talked, among other things, about the Nazis' rise to power and the importance of recognizing human rights. He went on to reflect on how a legislator or lawmaker can distinguish between good and evil.
In einem Großteil der rechtlich zu regelnden Materien kann die Mehrheit ein genügendes Kriterium sein. Aber dass in den Grundfragen des Rechts, in denen es um die Würde des Menschen und der Menschheit geht, das Mehrheitsprinzip nicht ausreicht, ist offenkundig.
Germany's past was also part of his speech. He described the anti-Nazi resistance fighters as heroes because they knew how to distinguish right from wrong. They knew it was just a fight against something that was lawful, yet unfair. He also highlighted that Christianity has never imposed a so-called body of law to the state or to society, but rather it has appealed to nature and reason as true sources of law. Along those same lines, the Pope said that when judgment is based only on functionality, justice becomes endangered. He also called for, quote, human ecology, which focuses on having respect for human nature.
Auch der Mensch hat eine Natur, die achten muss und die nicht beliebig manipulieren kann. Der Mensch ist nicht nur sich selbst machende Freiheit. Der Mensch macht sich nicht selbst. Er ist Geist und Wille. Er ist Geist und Wille, aber er ist auch Natur. Und sein Wille ist dann recht, wenn er auf die Natur achtet, sie hört und sich annimmt als der er ist und der sich nicht selbst gemacht hat.
The Pope added that having faith in a God who created humankind and nature and also blessed people with dignity has allowed the West to recognize the equality of all men.
Von der Überzeugung eines Schöpfergottes her ist die Idee der Menschenrechte, die Idee der Gleichheit aller Menschen vor dem Recht, die Erkenntnis der Unantastbarkeit der Menschenwürde in jedem einzelnen Menschen und das Wissen um die Verantwortung der Menschen für ihr Handeln entwickelt worden. Diese Erkenntnisse der Vernunft bilden unser kulturelles Gedächtnis.
In closing, he asked all European politicians to protect the standards of justice that are now part of Western tradition. But there was also room for laughter. The president of Germany's parliament accidentally stepped on the Pope's cassock. It drew some smiles, including one from Chancellor Angela Merkel.
After speaking in Parliament, the Pope headed over to Berlin's Olympic Stadium to celebrate Mass for about 70,000 Catholics. In news now from around the country, Pope Benedict XVI has accepted the resignation of Archbishop Daniel Beeklein of Indianapolis for health reasons. The Archbishop is 73 years old, 2 years younger than the age at which bishops are required by canon law to turn in their resignation to the Pope. Over the past 3 years, he's suffered a series of health problems. In March of this year, he suffered a mild stroke, which has him confined to a wheelchair. And in 2008, he was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma and underwent a successful course of chemotherapy and radiation treatments. And the Archbishop said he planned to return to his roots as a Benedictine monk at the St. Meinrad Archabbey in southern Indiana. Archbishop Eaglein has headed the Indianapolis Archdiocese since 1992. Auxiliary Bishop Christopher Coyne was named Apostolic Administrator of the Archdiocese by the Pope until a permanent successor is named by the Vatican. In other news from around the country, New York Archbishop Timothy Dolan, president of the U.S. Bishops' Conference, has sent President Barack Obama a letter informing the president that his administration's fight against the Defense of Marriage Act, DOMA, will undermine marriage and create a serious breach of church-state relations. The DOMA law defines marriage as between one man and one woman. In the letter, the Archbishop argues that it's especially wrong and unfair to equate opposition to redefining marriage with either intentional or willfully ignorant racial discrimination, as he said the Obama administration is insisting on doing. Archbishop Dolan underscored the Church's position, recognizing the immeasurable personal dignity and equal worth of all individuals, including those with same-sex attraction, and he said the Church rejects all hatred and unjust treatment against any person. But he called for dialogue with the president on the DOMA and the definition of marriage as a union of man and a woman. And finally in the news, according to a panelist at a recent webinar sponsored by the National Catholic Partnership on Disability, renewed momentum to legalize physician-assisted suicide is being caused by an increase in the number of movies that present assisted suicide in a positive light. Capuchin Franciscan Father Dan Meindling, academic dean at Mount St. Mary's Seminary in Emmitsburg, Maryland, pointed to the PG-13 rated $1 Million Baby and The Sea Inside as examples because they suggest that some lives are not worth living. 2 weeks before the webinar, Massachusetts Attorney General Martha Coakley certified the language of an initiative for the November 2012 ballot that would make assisted suicide legal in the Commonwealth. This means supporters of the initiative can start to gather the almost 70,000 signatures required for the initiative's effort to continue. Boston's Cardinal Sean O'Malley strongly condemned the proposal in a homily at the annual Red Mass sponsored by the Catholic Lawyers Guild of Boston. He said that he hoped the citizens of the Commonwealth will not be seduced by words like dignity and compassion, which are means to disguise the sheer brutality of helping people to kill themselves. That is all the information we have for you at this time. Please stay with Catholic TV for more Catholic news. Until then, I'm Kevin Nelson, and I'll see you next time on Catholic News Break. Hi everyone, I'm Kevin Nelson for Catholic News Break. Here's what's happening this week in the news. We begin with news from the Vatican. In a videotaped message broadcast by the German state television network, Pope Benedict XVI said his upcoming trip to Germany will focus on restoring God's place in individual and social life. He said he was looking forward to his third visit to his homeland as Pope and highlighted main events, including his address to the German Parliament and Mass in Berlin's Olympic Stadium. The theme of the visit is "Where there is God, there is a future." There are about 100 of Germany's 620 parliamentarians who have said they will boycott the Pope's speech to the Bundestag, the lower house of the German parliament, because the papal event violates the principle of the separation of church and state. Father Federico Lombardi, spokesman for the Vatican, said the Pope was going at the invitation of the President of the Parliament. In a video broadcast, German Chancellor Angela Merkel said she would be happy to welcome Pope Benedict to Germany. She said it was important to strengthen the unity of Christians in an increasingly secular German society. In other news from the Vatican, we told you how bus tours of the Vatican Gardens are now available to tourists. Now Rome Reports gives you all the details of what you'll see during your tour of the previously closed-off area of the Vatican.
When visiting the Vatican, some people only see St. Peter's Square. But beyond these columns, there's so much more to see. Places like the Vatican Gardens, for example. Now a new and improved tour gives pilgrims access to this and other sites. You have to pass by the small forests, by fountains, the Vatican radio headquarters, also by different shrines. It may be small, but the city is rich in values, culture, history, and religion. The tours were recently relaunched by the Opera Romana Pellegrinaggi. By boarding these buses, pilgrims can take a one-hour tour inside the Vatican walls. There, one can see the Pope's so-called heliport, where the Pope's helicopter lands and takes off. Also, the Vatican's small train station that was built in the 1930s. And of course, one can visit different shrines like the Our Lady of Lourdes Grotto, where the Pope often prays.
To
think that it's the garden where the Pope prays a rosary, and when doing so, he prays for all of us. The fact that people can visit this site and then know that afterward the Pope will eventually pass by that very site to pray for us. It creates a spiritual connection. During the
Besides rafting and kayaking, yet another awe-inspiring water sport is canyoning, to explore the hidden landscapes. The fun and excitement that Adventures in Nepal. Every individual residing in whichever part of the world will definitely recognize these scintillating natural heritages as the Himalayas at the very first sight of it. And you will surely be reminded of Nepal's. These enticing Himalayas are of Nepal, of course. You might have certainly been reminded of Mount Everest, individual residing, beautiful gift of nature. A world heritage which will not just tantalize you with its exotic views, but also inspire you to conquer it of Nepal's and dare to fulfill the yearning desire to step on the highest peak of the world. The peak is awaiting your amiable company. Located between China and India, the gift of nature country of Nepal covers an area of 147,181 square kilometers, ranging from 70 meters to the highest point at 8,848 meters above sea level. Nepal is a land of natural exquisiteness and cultural diversity. Wherever